welcome to another ConsultWebs webinar, Measuring Marketing ROI in Your Law Firm. This is Tanner Jones here. Some of you very well may know me, others that don't. Let me give just a quick intro to myself here. I've been with ConsultWebs now. This year makes a full decade in helping law firms attract the right cases from the internet and navigating through the World Wide Web. Lots of opportunities online today. And I suspect that most of you here who are attending likely are very interested in understanding ROI and, more importantly, how to measure ROI. I'm seeing a return on investment, or ROI, being used more and more often today. It's almost become a buzzword. In fact, I would say it has become a buzzword in the marketers' content efforts. And you can't go to social media without seeing someone touting more ROI or better ROI here. And so this topic obviously is extremely important, return on investment. Return on investment really is going to be, I found it's defined a number of ways, and we're going to get into that today. But the biggest thing is just fully understanding ROI, specifically how to measure it when it comes to marketing. A lot of this discussion today is going to be around digital marketing in particular, but it's also going to touch into other aspects of marketing. And that's ultimately one of the bigger challenges, is effectively measuring the entire return on investment from all marketing efforts. So my hope today is that by the time we walk away from this discussion, you're going to get some value, specifically how to track leads in your law firm. Many of you probably are tracking leads. Hopefully we're going to give you some practical tips to walk away with in an effort to consistently and effectively, and more importantly, accurately track leads from your firm, or that's coming through your firm. Calculating cost per lead. Cost per lead is an extremely valuable metric. One that follows right behind that, and arguably more important, is the cost per case metric. Being able to track these simultaneously to measure against each other to see how well your close rates are happening within the firm, extremely valuable data that, if you're tracking on a routine basis, is ultimately going to give you better information to make ultimately better decisions for your business and for your marketing efforts. We also have some great resources along the way, and we'll be giving you a resource that we'll email to all attendees here on how to boost your marketing ROI. I want to encourage you, as we go through this, feel welcome to send over questions. If you hear something you want to dive in deeper, shoot some questions. And I also want to offer, if you want to have a more specific conversation around your firm, realizing that every firm is different, from intake to marketing to the types of cases that you're pursuing. This can look very different for individual firms. And so I'm more than happy to have a more detailed, more custom conversation around your firm if that would be helpful to you. So let's dive in. I want to start with really one main question here. And this is something that it's extremely important to ask in getting started, and something you need to be honest with yourself and honest around your whole process of marketing and intake, and ultimately all tracking that goes into that for all marketing efforts for your firm. How many of you are tracking your return on investment? I suspect that if you are here in the webinar, there's at least some interest in better understanding ROI and how to measure it. But with that interest probably means that you've done some degree of tracking in the past. If not, you're not alone. How many law firms are tracking leads, specifically your cost per lead? So we'll use the acronym CPL with respect to cost per lead. How many of you know how much you're paying for every individual lead that comes into your firm? How many law firms track cost per case? CPC. Cost per case, again, extremely valuable metric if you're looking at it in simultaneous to cost per lead. These questions probably, I would encourage you to take them to your board, take them to your marketing team, discuss them, and find out how many individuals in the firm actually either A, know you're tracking it, or B, know how to track it. I suspect that your responses are going to be quite similar to what we found. We have a couple great marketers at ConsultWebs who started Lawsome, the Lawsome podcast. If you're not familiar or aware of the podcast, I strongly encourage you to check it out. Tons of great information, everything from marketing to management and everything inside of that, specific to law firms. And they polled lawyers on Twitter asking who knows their cost per lead. What is your cost per lead? And it's not surprising, maybe surprising to you all, but the majority of respondents noted that they had no idea. No, they don't track it, have no idea. And what's even more interesting is going beyond the yes and no responses, 23%, so a quarter of the respondents stated that it just wasn't even important to their firm. And then 20% showed some interest. How do I calculate it? And again, I imagine that some of the folks on this webinar today probably are leaning more toward that, how do I calculate cost per lead, or you wouldn't be here. Or you're just simply interested in learning to see if there's any other tips that you could pick up on tracking. This is not, basically it comes down to, you're not alone if you're not effectively tracking it, or you don't feel like you've fully closed the gap in fully measuring a return on investment with your marketing efforts. Going a little deeper with that poll, we asked how many are tracking cost per case. And while the responses were similar, it's actually interesting that even more folks responded with no, a resounding no, almost the majority at 41% of all the respondents noting that no, they have no idea what the cost per case is. It's not something they track. And my guess is for most entrepreneurs or business owners, if you're not tracking it, it means it's not important. Now, some would argue with that because most of you feel like making profit and making money is an important part of business. Of course we do. But it's so interesting to see this disconnect with law firms across the country where the vast majority just simply either A, don't see the value, or they're just not taking time and effort to do it. And we hope to be able to give you some of the tools to be able to effectively track that today. I again want to point out that there's still a healthy percentage of people who are interested in learning to calculate cost per case, but still, again, 20%, almost a quarter, noting that it's not important. And I'm curious to know why. I think that there are several assumptions there. Be honest with yourself. Ask yourself if you've never really had a strong desire to put much time and energy into this, why is that? From my experience in working with law firms, there's a number of reasons. One primary reason is that you're just too busy. A lot of law firms tend to, or lawyers in particular, tend to just get oversaturated in workload, in their caseload. And so it's extremely difficult to separate themselves from being in the business to be able to work on the business. And that's, at the end of the day, I would push back on that response and say it's an excuse, because you're a business owner first and foremost. And to be able to better serve clients, you have to be able to first serve your business and make sure that you're running profitably and successfully in order to continue to provide good representation over the years. And so this is such an extremely important concept when it comes to managing a successful business, and more importantly, managing a growing business. And again, that's why we're going to dive into it. Let me walk through a formula to measuring return on investment. So we're going to start kind of with this lofty big concept at first, and then we're going to kind of walk through the individual components that make up tracking return on investment. Some of you, if you go back to business school or go back to your time in a classroom, you've probably seen this equation or this formula before. Some of you very well may be working off of a similar formula today to track return on investment. And if you are, fantastic. You're doing very well. This whole concept really shouldn't be as daunting as what it may be to some folks. And I want to point out again that we have a great resource we're going to provide to all attendees that includes this formula. So no need to try to write it down or take notes in this effort, because you will get this information. Everything we're discussing is yours. I want to walk you through a quick example of using this formula in a real life study here. So here's an example. You're investing $6,500 a month in search engine optimization, working to get your website ranking in the search engines and visible to more prospective clients in your market area. Last month, you looked through your records, you signed 5 cases, 5 clients that came from the website. When you look through those case types, now some of you may have multiple practice areas that you're marketing, others are very focused and have a pretty good understanding of what your average value per case is, what the expected fees will be. And in this instance, we'll say an average $5,000 in expected fees per client. So based on that, you're going to take 5 clients that you signed at $5,000 in revenue each. That's $25,000 in total revenue earned in last month's efforts online, or at least from the website, from the SEO campaign. That would be the gross profit. Now, I will point out, not to overly complicate it by any means, but with gross profit is going to be your revenue minus your cost of goods sold. And for most lawyers, depending on the size of your office and the number of attorneys and staff that you have, usually that cost of goods sold is going to be minimal. And so for most of you, you're going to be able to take that revenue figure and not have to worry about cost of goods sold. If you're running a larger law firm and you have a good sense of the amount of time and expenses that are going into individual cases, you can do a best guess here in terms of the expenses and subtract that from the revenue. I want to be clear that that's not general expenses, that's cost of goods sold. Again, we can get into deeper discussion there. Really want to just keep it as simple as possible. So we'll take the revenue in this instance, $25,000. You subtract the investment that you put into SEO. So that'd be $25,000 minus $6,500, equaling $18,500. This is extremely important to note because, again, I've found that from one marketer to the next, or one business owner to the next, people have different definitions of ROI, or at least how to calculate return on investment. Some are very, I would say, high level and keep it basic, which is perfectly fine. But some keep it totally basic and just simply take that, the amount of revenue earned, and divide it by the investment. But for me, I want to know that if I'm going to put $1 into this particular marketing effort, getting $1 back in return is a wash. There's no return there, and there's not an investment. So I want to make sure that I'm subtracting what I've put into it first so that I can get a true sense of return on investment. And that's exactly what this formula allows you to do. Relatively simple, but yet extremely effective. So once we get that 18,500 figure, now we're going to take that 18,500 divided by 6,500, which equals 2.85. So essentially 2.85 to 1 investment, or to round it up, 3 to 1 investment, ROI investment. And I would say too that you can look at it from a percentage standpoint at 285% ROI. Most marketers, or I would say most business owners, when they're investing in a marketing campaign, push ideally for a 5 to 1 ROI. That's the general consensus in what I've seen in most marketing efforts. If I feel confident and comfortable in at least generating a 5 to 1 return on investment, that's a good thing. Now, that being said, most of the time they're just simply taking the total revenue and dividing it by the investment, which doesn't consider that first dollar you put in to match it to get that back and to break even. So with that being said, a 3 to 1 ROI in almost all instances for online marketing is extremely favorable. You're getting $2 back for every dollar you put in. I think that's a great benchmark for any and all marketing. When you get into a 2 to 1, you're still making money. There's no question about it. But you're not taking into consideration expenses, which is going to eat up more profit. So again, I would encourage each of you, when you start to get in the habit of tracking ROI, look at it from the standpoint of, I need at least a 3 to 1 for it to make sense. Push for the 5 to 1. If you're getting anything over a 5 to 1 ROI, I will say you're doing extremely well across the board for all marketing. Some of you are sitting here scratching your head, or maybe even worse, beating your head up against a chalkboard. And when you start thinking about the formulas behind this, and really just some of you get overwhelmed just by the thought of how much tracking potentially is involved in being able to calculate this. I want to assure you that it really, once you get in the habit of doing it, it's not overly complicated. In fact, we built an ROI calculator. A relatively simple formula, really just using the formula I pointed out earlier, into an easy access web page. And so this will include a link to this ROI calculator following the webinar. and feel free to bookmark that. You can go back to it. You can use it however you wish. The biggest thing here I want to point out too is that it's not as just as simple as, spitting out a number at the end of the month and keying those into the formula and calculating a return on investment. If only it were that simple. And in fact, my guess is that most of you who are attending today probably have found that it's not always as simple or cut and dry as most marketers try to make it out to be. And by no means do I want to tout this as something that you're going to get the most clear and accurate data if you just simply put it into practice. It requires a bit of a balance between art and science, and really human relations. And that's why I really point out the importance of listening. And we're going to get in a little bit deeper concept behind that as we talk through the 4 ways to track leads in your law firm. A lot of people start with this question. When people call into your office, your intake team are going to ask, how did you hear about our law firm? If you're not currently doing that, then that is absolutely one step forward in getting this data. That's not going to give you everything, but it will get you started. I note a few different intake software systems out there that I've heard phenomenal reviews about. I know the owners behind them, and I can stand behind these groups. Captura, LeadDocket, in my case, they're all doing a good job. And really, they allow you to systematically track this information and really get away from a lot of the manual data entry from day to day. If you're small enough as a law firm, you have the personnel and the resources to be able to track it manually, by all means. It's a great way of doing it. But if you're high in volume for intake and you're limited in resources, then a system like this is going to be extremely valuable to automate a lot of this tracking. I want to encourage you though, when you're working with your intake team in this process, you have to go beyond asking just the simple question, how did you hear about us? I've heard time and time again, we have a number of clients that advertise in multiple platforms, television, billboards, bus wraps, radio, internet, and then on the internet, everything in between, pay-per-click advertising, video advertising, Facebook advertising, SEO. And so it's extremely difficult by just simply asking this top level question, how did you hear about my law firm, to get the right answer. What I mean by that is most of the time, and well, I'll give you a scenario here. If any of you have taken eyewitness testimonies and you have multiple testimonies around a particular event, every individual saw the event, but as they recount it, the details are different. That's because the human mind works very, very differently from person to person, and people see certain things. They gravitate to certain things. And especially if you've been advertising for a long time and you have a great brand in your market, you're going to hear all types of responses. TV advertising clients of ours, some of which who have gotten out of TV years ago, still have people tell them they saw them on TV. It's a common thing. And so keep in mind that just simply asking how you hear about us doesn't always give you that exact answer that you're looking for. What firms get caught up in is that last touch attribution. Last touch attribution is essentially, where was that person when they decided to pick up the phone and call your office? Were they sitting at home on the couch, watching your TV spot? Were they in front of a computer after just searching for a car accident lawyer near me? So ask the person, what ultimately led you to call us? What's going through your mind? Help me understand where you've been through this process. And dig. It really takes somebody who goes beyond just checking boxes on an intake form. You want intake personnel who are relationship builders, who are good at asking questions, and more importantly, good at taking notes, data entry. This allows you to really start to identify commonalities in what is making the phone ring, what is driving the leads. With that data, now you have the ability to truly and more accurately track return on investment, and specifically the cost per lead and the cost per case metrics that we talked about earlier. This is never going to be perfect. So don't set that as your benchmark in terms of perfection for data. Again, because you're leaning on a couple different sources in order to get this data, but you're also leaning on eyewitness testimony to get this data. At the end of the day, if you're doing it consistently, the story is going to ultimately tell you the same thing. And that's what you're after. You're after the story. You're after what is making the phone ring, what is ultimately driving business into your door. There are other ways, specifically online, that give you a lot more data. And with respect to, for ConsultWebs being a digital marketing agency, we value what the web can provide in terms of data and tracking. Traditional advertising doesn't always give as granular of data, but still can give you enough data to make good decisions. The beauty with online is that there are tons of ways to track activity all the way up to the point of that last touch attribution. And you want to use that. And so I would encourage you, talk with your web providers. Talk to them about ultimately how they are tracking cost per lead and cost per case, and encourage them, hold yourself and hold them accountable to mutually calculating that from month to month. If you're both working toward the same goal, again, you're going to have a better outcome. Yes, we want perfection. We realize it's not realistic to achieve it, but as long as we're pointing toward it, we're having conversations around it, we're going to get much more valuable data at the end of each month, which is ultimately going to allow you as the business owner or you as the marketing director to make better decisions in your marketing efforts and to drive even better return on investment, even better profits down the road. Going right along with, going beyond tracking links and utilizing Google Analytics to be able to track goal pages and what specifically is working, what pages are getting accessed, and what pages are ultimately converting users. You can also use call tracking. ConsultWebs uses a tool called Call Tracking Metrics. There's actually tons of software out there available for tracking phone calls. CallRail is another well-trusted one. But at the end of the day, you want to be able to track your phone calls. Tracking phone calls is something that I think more and more law firms are starting to come around to. I think historically, when I first started nearly 10 years ago, the idea of putting a unique phone number on your website, getting away from a branded number, was scary to a lot of law firms, and I get that. You've invested heavily into branded numbers, and you didn't want to get away from it. But at the end of the day, you have to look at risk reward and cost benefit here. The amount of data that you can collect as a law firm by tracking phone calls, specifically from the web, is going to, and again, enable you to have the data and the information needed to make even better decisions on future marketing efforts. Real quick, I'll just explain call tracking. We find that over 80% of leads that come through online, when you can compare phone call leads to contact form submissions to live chat, if you have, for example, Engage or Apex Chat, you are going to see nearly 80% of all leads come through the phone. So that's an overwhelming percentage. And so by not being able to track what's causing people or what's driving people to pick up the phone and call your office, you're in the dark from month to month. So Call Tracking Metrics is going to tell you, what the most popular day or most popular hour of the day of getting phone calls, so that you can staff accordingly. It's going to also tell you how many phone call leads you drove any given day or week or month and so forth. This software in many instances also goes even deeper, giving you the ability to see where the user came from before they called your office. Did they come from Facebook? Did they come from the search engines? Did they click a paid ad? And then what pages they visited. So it'll show you the trail of pages that they visited on their way to converting, and then what page they were on when they decided to pick up the phone and call you. So, aside from all the data with respect to tracking cost per lead and cost per case, that data itself tells a tremendous story, enabling you and or your web marketing provider to continuously make better decisions based on what's working, and then conversely based on what's not working, what's not driving phone calls. Hugely valuable. All of that, again, points to being able to effectively track leads, the total number of leads and the cost per lead. I want to again point back to some of the software. If you are at a point in your law office that either you've grown beyond being able to manually track leads and you need something to help better organize intake and follow up on intake, more automation in intake, I would strongly encourage you to look at groups like Captora or LeadDocket, or even MyCase. Those are tremendous software, and I'd also be happy to talk through that with you to determine what would make most sense for your business. That gives you a place to track it all in a single location, which is obviously very efficient. And as long as you have total buy-in from your intake team and they are asking the right questions and keying in the right data, you are going to have more data and more information than ever before, enabling you to drive better ROI, or investment, return on investment, over time. ConsultWebs realized this a number of years ago. We've been helping law firms now since 1999, 20th year in business, helping exclusively law firms online. And it wasn't up until maybe 5 or 6 years ago when we determined that many firms, and this is not just law firms, this is most business owners throughout the country, they get lost in the minutia of business. They get too caught up in being task saturated and don't focus on what's important, the main key metrics of marketing and for business. So that led us to create this dashboard. And this dashboard like this is relatively easy. It's simple, and it really doesn't have to be overly complex or sophisticated. It needs to track your main metrics. So a dashboard like this enables our clients to be able to very quickly look any given month and see a cost per lead and a cost per case, overall investment, and other metrics that ultimately support those top level metrics, rankings, and other things like that. But again, the big pieces would be cost per lead and cost per case. Knowing that data gives you the ability to make better decisions long term for hiring, for example, for doubling down on certain initiatives, or even pulling back entirely and getting away from something that just simply is not producing a reasonable cost per case. Let's get in a little bit deeper into calculating cost per lead. This, again, very well may be basic to some of you. Hopefully, it's going to give you some good practical next steps for those of you who are not currently tracking it. First and foremost, add up all of your marketing spend. Now, you can do this on a holistic scale, and I would encourage you to do that because it is a good, healthy metric to look at generally if you're going to combine all of your marketing efforts, every single marketing dollar that's going out the door, whether that's in like direct advertising, television or radio, whether it's in inbound marketing like SEO, or even in event marketing. If you're doing any kind of charitable efforts and you're stroking checks on a quarterly basis to certain organizations or nonprofits in your community, take all of that into consideration, combine all that money, and then turn around and look at all the leads that have come into your door over the last month. By doing that, you're going to divide you take the total marketing spend and then you divide it by all new leads. That's going to give you a cost per lead metric. Now, again, holistically, looking at all of these efforts, that's going to give you a quick temperature check any given month on the health of your marketing. We'll get in a little bit deeper in terms of measuring cost per case, but until you start tracking cost per lead, I can assure you, you will never have the data to measure cost per case. So this is absolutely step one. And going deeper for the firms that really want to truly understand this and get this figured out, I would then encourage you to go and track individual marketing efforts. And this is something that we strongly encourage here at ConsultWebs. For example, look at your SEO investment and specifically tie the leads that have been driven directly from your organic search results. Same with Facebook advertising, same with all other forms of marketing. Track the total amount that has been invested into that particular marketing source and how many leads have directly come from that marketing source. And then that way you would have a month-to-month cost per lead metric for every individual marketing sources. From there, obviously, you're going to be able to quickly determine which marketing campaign is most effective with respect to driving leads. But as we all know, looking at it purely at leads does not tell the full story. And most business owners would immediately object to saying cost per lead is a completely useless stat for my business because it doesn't tell me how much business I'm signing. To some degree, I would agree with that, but at the end of the day, until you figure out your cost per lead, again, you'll never figure out your cost per case. We'll talk about it momentarily, but if you have a good sense of what you're paying per lead for a particular marketing source, and then you comparatively look at it on the cost per case, if you see any discrepancy when you're looking at one marketing source to another, it's going to be very easy to identify, for example, what may not be producing on the very bottom of the funnel. So let me give you a perfect example of this. You could, I've known of lots of lead generation companies out there historically that are great at driving leads, but when it comes to actually signing those leads, the percentage to close is dramatically lowered. Meaning, who knows how they're driving the lead to begin with, but if they're also turning around and sending that lead to 4 other law firms, it's no wonder your conversion rates on those leads are significantly lower than if you drove the lead yourself and someone was looking specifically for you. That's why it's so important to look at it to see the whole story, because while you could have a very reasonable cost per lead for one marketing source, the cost per case may be astronomically high simply because you cannot close any of those leads. And that's why you have to look at that data simultaneously. So then we jump into cost per case. I want to jump down here to the quote by Ken Hardison. Ken Hardison is a good longtime friend of ConsultWeb's, founder of PILMA. It's a marketing group primarily for personal injury and disability firms. But Ken has owned and operated several successful businesses over his years, but specifically law firms, personal injury firm, as well as an SSD firm. This example, I think, was taken from his SSD, his disability practice, but here's how he calculates cost per case. He combines the cost per lead with his conversion percentage. And when he says conversion percentage, he's referring to the number of leads that actually turn into cases, the ones he actually signs up. So personally, he knows he converts at 10% of the leads that come in his door. So specifically, if he spends $3,000 for 100 leads, he converts 10% of those leads, so 10% of 100, he's going to sign 10 cases. And so based on a $3,000 spend, his cost per case is $300. That's a great way to be able to quickly evaluate cost per case. Now, there is, using that type of formula, you're going to get into a little bit of ambiguity because your conversion rate likely is not always going to stick at 10%. That's what he had found was a consistent percentage. And I applaud business owners, specifically law firms, who have been able to drill it all the way down to knowing that if you send me 100 leads, I'm going to sign 10 of those. If you get it down to that point, you're doing quite well from an intake standpoint. We all know realistically that there's ebbs and flows in business. There are ebbs and flows in leads, there are ebbs and flows in the quality of leads, and there are ebbs and flows in the value of the individual case. So especially in like personal injury or frankly any contingency fee-based practice, you're going to have a much wider discrepancy in your fees from case to case than a firm that's billing hourly or that has more flat rate pricing model in terms of lawyers' fees. And so again, it all comes down to your individual business model, but this is a tremendous way to look at it. And I applaud Ken again for even having this formula in his own head and in his business, because if you can push toward understanding what your average close rate is or your conversion rate, you can make much better decisions in the future, but you can also hold your intake team and whoever you have assigned to closing those cases accountable to maintaining that percentage. So it's a good benchmark to have internally. To step back, I want to point out that there is a more general way of looking at this from a cost per case standpoint. You take the marketing investment, you divide it by the total cases signed from that marketing investment. That's going to give you your cost per case. So, looking at $5,000 in paid advertising, another $1,000 in the management of that, that's $6,000 total spend. You sign 6 cases from that. That's $1,000 cost per case from that marketing effort. You want to combine all of those expenses, divide it by the cases signed. Pretty easy formula, but again gives you the ability to compare that cost per case to the cost per lead and make sure that you're not having to chase a ton of people, which would then ultimately eat up more time, which then dilutes the value of that individual case. So again, track those simultaneously to one another to gain full perspective of performance across the board. Bringing this all together, I think that some firms, I can guarantee you that even for the folks that are in this room today discussing this, you're going to have varying levels of sophistication with respect to tracking overall marketing performance. Some of you have, you're 90% ahead of the law firms in this country. You're using these sophisticated dashboards already, but you also know that you've heard the old saying, junk in, junk out. And accountability is a major factor here. Accountability across the board. Accountability to your marketing provider by tracking this data, but also accountability to your own law firm. Accountability to your intake team to be able to get the right data so that it's not junk in, so that you don't get junk out, but yet instead you get the intake team to input the data that's going to ultimately feed the future of your business. Critically important. We're all out here just trying to help more people and successfully operate a business. Until you truly commit, not only you, but until you get buy-in from your entire firm on why tracking return on investment is valuable, it'll never be seamless. I can assure you of that. I've seen it time and time again where you have one partner, for example, who sees the value in it, they want to do it, but they don't get full and total buy-in, and because of that, you lose. There are holes, there are gaps in the process of being able to fully evaluate the data, where firms are not closing the gap in terms of saying, this one signed up. And to hop back into that smart dashboard that we created, we kind of pushed for this in terms of an accountability layer and allowing our clients to categorize the individual lead as signed up or rejected or referred out. And so what that does is that gives you, again, the data to be able to then take an individual lead all the way to whether it was closed, giving you then the ability to double down or to do more with that particular marketing source if it's one of your best performing marketing sources out there. Pointing to this spreadsheet here, you can see, there are firms that are operating purely off of manual inputs of data, and this can be just as effective. So I want to assure you that you don't have to have a dashboard like what's been mentioned today in order to get this figured out. There are firms out there, and even major advertising law firms, that are still tracking this type of data through manual inputs in spreadsheets or Google Sheets where they can share it among one another. I'll tell you that they can both be effective. It's less about the platform and more about the commitment and the inputs into it. By doing that, you ultimately have the ability to track from month to month. Lastly, I want to end by just saying tracking from month to month is important because it tells a story, but you never want to look at something purely from a month's performance standpoint. Most marketing, just like anything, there'll be ebbs and flows. So looking at it, the data from quarter to quarter, and then historically from last year's quarter, quarter one 18 versus quarter one 19, and then also looking at the entire year, cost per lead, cost per case from this particular marketing effort. That's what's going to allow you to make more educated decisions for future marketing and not just make a potentially irrational decision on 1 month's performance when overall very well could be performing extremely well. And I also want to reiterate the fact that looking at the value of the case is an extremely important factor in all of this too. So especially contingency fee-based law firms where you have wide discrepancies in the value of your cases, looking at it purely just from a cost per case standpoint often is not enough. So you have to look at it from a cost per lead, a cost per case, and then estimating your return on investment. For most of you, you're waiting a certain period of time before you actually collect the fees on these cases. But in most cases, you have a good understanding of what the value of that individual case is. Factor that into it so that, again, you're looking more holistically or comprehensively of true return on investment. I hope this has been useful to you. I do want to leave you with a great resource. This is something we're going to send to you. This particular resource covers a lot of what we've talked about today and more. So it'll get in a little bit more about investments versus profit, how to evaluate the two. Again, covering a lot of the topics we covered in terms of calculating return on investment or tracking leads. It also has a great framework for an ROI worksheet that you can utilize and use in the future, or share it with your colleagues and hopefully get buy-in from your team. And then also give you some great tips on short-term return on investment measurements, how to track that, how to measure short-term and long-term ROI. Also want to mention too that this conversation is something that we actually started a little while ago. I joined the Lawsome podcast recently, and we talked a little bit about tracking and ROI. And so that's going to be coming out next week. We're excited to be able to share that with our networks, and that'll be in conjunction with a lot of this other material that we hope is valuable to you all. As always, we're very grateful for the time you've spent with us. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel welcome to get with me. And best of luck. We want the best for you all. Take it back to the firm, implement it, let us know how it works. Thanks so much.